Imagine boarding a midnight flight to Geneva, clouds drifting beneath you. First-class comforts within reach, and then being told your seat isn't yours. Seated in 1A by right of ticket and talent. 16-year-old Arielle Monroe, a black tech prodigy who built an AI to help nonverbal children speak, suddenly finds herself accused of boarding error. Her father, billionaire Langston Monroe, watches silently from business class, disguised as an ordinary traveler. A privileged passenger insists Ariel doesn't belong, and the lead flight attendant agrees without question. What happens next will force an entire cabin to confront its deepest assumptions. Will they remain complicit in her erasure, or will they stand up for her dignity at 35,000 feet, as Ariel quietly chooses courage over silence? Unexpected allies emerge from an elderly diplomat to a young engineer, transforming one girl's fight for a seat into a powerful reckoning with bias and privilege. In a single night, the flight becomes a crucible for justice, empathy, and change. Are you ready to witness how a stolen seat can ground prejudice and ignite a movement? If you believe every person deserves to be seen and heard, hit like, share, and subscribe now to join us on this journey. Arielle Monroe sat quietly by the window, her hands folded gently in her lap. The hum of the aircraft was low, steady, almost comforting, a soft mechanical lullaby that masked the tension she felt settling into her chest. Outside, clouds drifted slowly across a pale blue sky, like cotton wading through silence. She should have been excited. 16, first class, her own seat, a private invitation to a global robotics symposium in Geneva. For most teenagers, this would be a dream. But not today. Today, she was aware of every glance that flickered her way and just as quickly disappeared. The tailored business suits, the quiet clicks of watch bezels, the sharp eyes from passengers who seemed surprised or worse, disapproving that she was seated there at all. She adjusted the leather strap of her backpack and let out a slow breath. Her fingers instinctively brushed the worn edge of the notebook in her lap, a black cloth-bound journal filled with sketches, code fragments, and handwritten ideas scribbled in late-night bursts of inspiration. Most of them revolved around her invention, Orin, a wearable AI device that translated facial microexpressions into emotional metrics. It was designed for children on the autism spectrum, and it worked. She closed her eyes. This seat wasn't gifted. It wasn't a favor. It was earned. But still, it didn't feel like it belonged to her. "Excuse me," came a voice, clipped, tight, feminine. Arielle opened her eyes. A woman stood in the aisle, early 40s, crisp white blouse tucked into tailored gray slacks, her lips painted a shade too bold for morning light. Her brows were slightly raised, as if surprised or, more likely, displeased. "You're in 2A, the woman said slowly, as if reading off a manifest. "That's my seat." Arielle blinked. "No, sorry. This is my seat," she said gently, reaching into her tote and pulling out the boarding pass. 2A, Arielle Monroe. The woman leaned in, snatched the boarding pass without asking, and inspected it with visible disbelief. Then she turned sharply. "Brianna," she called toward the galley. "Can I speak with you from behind the curtain?" A flight attendant emerged, blonde bun, perfect posture. Her name tag read Brianna Carver. "Yes, Ms. Granger. This young lady is in my seat." Brianna glanced down at Arielle, then at the boarding pass still in Victoria Granger's hand. Her expression didn't shift, not even an inch. "I'll take care of it," she said. Ariel watched as Brianna leaned in, her voice a whisper barely audible over the engines. "Miss Monroe, was it?" she asked, though she clearly already knew. Ariel nodded. "I think there might have been a mix-up. We actually need you to move to economy. Just for a bit. It's temporary." Why, Ariel asked softly. A pause. "This is a high-demand route," Brianna said. "We sometimes reshuffle when a VIP checks in late." "I'm here on a direct invitation," Ariel said, her voice still calm but firmer now. "This is my seat." Brianna offered a smile, polite but hollow. "I understand. But if you could just cooperate, I'll make sure you're compensated." Ariel didn't move. She felt heat rise in her throat, but not from anger, from recognition. She'd seen this before, in restaurants, in museums, in classrooms, the casual redirection, the subtle removal, always temporary, always polite, always erasing her from spaces she rightfully occupied. From the corner of her eye, she saw someone rise, an older white man, late 70s, silver hair, dark green corduroy blazer. He stepped forward. "I've been watching," he said. His voice was warm but stern, the kind that carried both history and certainty. "If the young lady has a boarding pass that says 2A, then 2A is hers." Victoria Granger turned sharply. "And who are you?" "Just someone who believes in seats staying assigned," he replied with a small smile. Brianna Carver hesitated. Then, without another word, she turned and disappeared behind the galley curtain. Victoria let out a sigh somewhere between frustration and disbelief, then turned to walk back to her new seat. Economy. Ariel sat there quietly, her fingers wrapped tightly around her notebook now. Her heart thudded against her ribs, not from fear, but from knowing it wasn't over, far from it. Langston Monroe adjusted his cufflinks as the aircraft cabin door sealed shut behind him. He was used to moving in silence, a man whose presence usually preceded his name. But today, he was flying under a different name. Quiet, anonymous. He didn't want anyone to know he was on this flight, not even his daughter. Langston had learned long ago that the most honest moments happened when people didn't know you were watching. He chose 6B in business class, deliberately close enough to see, far enough not to be seen. And when he heard the voice, cold, clipped, dismissive, telling his daughter to move, his jaw clenched, but he stayed seated, watching. He knew Ariel could hold her own. Still, it pained him that she needed to. He remembered her at 7, building a solar-powered water filter from a Lego kit and aluminum foil. Even then, she didn't just want to invent, she wanted to help. Now she was flying to Geneva because her AI tool, Orin, had already changed how therapists approached autism care. He felt pride, yes, but also guilt, because no matter how much he shielded her, the world still tried to shrink her. Ariel sat tall, though. She didn't cry, didn't flinch. Even when the woman Victoria, something towered over her, like she was a mistake that needed correcting. Langston had almost stood up then, almost revealed who he was. But then the old man stepped in, George Whitlow, if he recalled correctly, former ambassador, quiet voice, firm backbone. He was grateful for the interruption and furious that it was needed at all. Meanwhile, flight attendants moved through the cabin with practiced smiles, unaware they were being evaluated by the very man who designed their airline's AI training module. Langston hadn't come on this flight just to watch his daughter present in Switzerland. He had come because this flight and this crew were part of a silent review, a review he funded, a program he'd designed. He wanted to know how unconscious bias showed up in small spaces at 35,000 feet. And today, it had shown up in 2A, as usual, uninvited. He watched Brianna walk past him without recognition. Just another black man in a suit. And that was the point. People perform differently when they believe no one is watching, even more so when the one watching blends into the background. He took out a slim notepad, began writing, a code word, a timestamp, a trigger phrase escalation initiated. Langston didn't intend to cause panic. Not yet, but if the pattern continued or got worse, he had the authority to do more than observe. In fact, he had the power to ground the flight entirely. Not many people knew that, which was exactly how he liked it. From the front of the cabin, Victoria Granger sat rigid in her economy seat, furiously typing on her phone. Ariel could see her from the reflection in the glass. See the tension, the fury. She didn't look victorious. She looked exposed. Ariel wondered briefly who she was texting. Maybe her assistant. Maybe someone more powerful. She reached for her headphones, but paused. Something felt unfinished. She leaned into the window again, staring at the clouds. Then she thought of her mother. She had passed 3 years ago. Breast cancer. Quiet battle, loud courage. Ariel had once asked her how she stayed so kind in a world that could be so cruel. Her mother smiled, because kindness doesn't ask permission to exist. She had said, "It just is." Ariel swallowed the lump in her throat. Her hands tightened around her notebook. She thought of Orrin, of the kids it had helped, of Jacob, the little boy who told his mother for the first time, "I'm scared." That was the point of it all, to give voice to the invisible. But right now, she felt voiceless. Not because she couldn't speak, but because she shouldn't have to. A ripple of laughter came from row 4, a pair of young men in blazers, talking loudly about stocks. One of them glanced back at her, then smirked, whispered something. She didn't need to hear it to know the tone. Langston noticed, too. His pen paused mid-sentence. He reached for his phone and sent a coded message to the back-end review team, Section B, Behavior Degradation Observed. Mark passenger, 4C, 4D, begin deeper profile trace. The team would follow it quietly, discreetly. He wasn't here to punish. He was here to reveal, and what he was seeing was enough. From behind the curtain, Brianna reappeared this time with another attendant. Tom. He was younger, nervous energy. They whispered quickly. Ariel watched them out of the corner of her eye. Her body remained still, but her mind was racing. She had a decision to make: stay silent and finish the flight in dignity, or stand, speak, and invite whatever came next. She thought again of her mother, of kindness that doesn't ask permission, and she realized maybe this time, kindness needed to be loud. She stood, all eyes turned, and slowly, she stepped into the aisle not to move, but to speak. Ariel stood there for a long moment. The cabin had fallen silent. Utensils paused mid-air. Conversations died mid-sentence. The weight of what had just occurred settled over the first-class cabin like an invisible fog. Her boarding pass was still clutched in her fingers, now slightly wrinkled from the tension in her grip. She could feel the heat in her face, but not the heat of shame. That she had unlearned long ago. It was the heat of awareness, of being seen, and yet unseen. She slowly returned to her seat in 2A, placing her notebook gently back onto her lap. Her fingers brushed its cover almost like an apology. as if the object had somehow shared the offense with her. She looked out the window again. Clouds still drifted in silence. From across the aisle, Victoria Granger sat rigidly in her new seat, lips tight, back ramrod straight. She hadn't looked Ariel's way once, not since the incident, not even a passing glance of recognition, not an ounce of regret. Ariel wondered if she even felt any. Then she looked further down the aisle. There he was, Langston Monroe, her father. The world knew him by many names: tech magnate, AI visionary, media recluse, but to Ariel, he was just Dad. He was in 3C, business class, seated calmly in the second row, a closed book in his hands. His head was tilted slightly forward, as if in thought. He had watched the whole thing, every second. Their eyes met, briefly. She expected something in his gaze, a signal, a raised brow, even a slight shake of the head. But he gave her nothing, only stillness, and that, somehow, meant everything, because her father had taught her something long ago, something that now echoed in her memory with the clarity of a bell. When silence is dignified, it's louder than rage. She could hear his voice now, calm and low, in that late-night kitchen conversation they'd had after her robotics project had been rejected for feeling too ambitious by the science fair committee. "You don't need to fight to be heard," he had said. "You just need to stand where they told you not to." And now, here she was, sitting in a seat they tried to take, unmoving, whole. Langston didn't rise, didn't call the crew, didn't reveal who he was. Not yet. That wasn't his way. He had always believed people reveal their true nature in the moments they think no one is watching. He would wait. He would let them continue digging the grave, and then he would gently hand them the shovel. In the galley, Brianna Carver paced nervously. The incident had not gone the way she planned. She had hoped Ariel would comply quietly. Economy had already been prepped for her. She had even arranged a complimentary juice and blanket, as if that could offset the humiliation. But now a passenger had spoken up, one of the old white men. And worse, some people in economy had seen it too. Whispers were spreading. She tapped on the wall intercom. "Captain Keene," she said softly. "I need a moment in private if you have it." A moment later, the cockpit door cracked open and a middle-aged man with silvering hair emerged. Calm face, authoritative presence. Captain Douglas Keene had flown for nearly 30 years. His uniform was immaculate. His jaw clenched as Brianna pulled him aside. "We have a bit of a situation in first," she whispered. "What kind of situation?" "Bored in confusion. A young woman refused to give up her seat for a last-minute VIP. A bit of an attitude. Caused a minor scene." Keene frowned. "Who's the VIP Victoria Granger?" Brianna said quickly. "CEO of Crown Bay Investments." Keene nodded. "Big account. We've flown her before. And the girl he asked, she's unknown," Brianna replied quickly. "Boarding pass says Arielle Monroe." She watched Keene's expression closely. Nothing, no flicker of recognition, but Langston Monroe. She had read the name on the manifest. She had heard rumors that he occasionally flew anonymously. Was the girl related? She couldn't risk it. "Just keep an eye," she muttered, "in case anything escalates." Captain Keene sighed. "I'll walk through in a bit, but we're already at cruising altitude. Keep it professional." She nodded, but professional was starting to feel like a very unstable word. Yeah. Meanwhile, back in row 3, Langston gently closed his book. He was no longer reading. His mind was working now quietly, methodically, the way it always did when systems malfunctioned. And this was a malfunction, a social one, cultural, operational. He had designed frameworks for adaptive AI, smart cities, decentralized response architecture, but none of those solved this. The look on his daughter's face, the way the attendant had spoken to her, the automatic assumption, the corporate hierarchy that still defined who was supposed to sit where. And now, the choice lay with him. He could intervene. He could have the entire flight crew replaced before landing. He had that kind of influence. But would they learn anything, or would they just apologize, clean their hands, and move on? Langston had learned that teaching power lasted longer than using it. So he waited for the mistake, for the pattern to repeat. Ariel's thoughts were spinning. She didn't want to cry, not because it would make her look weak, but because she wasn't sad. She was awake, fully. This wasn't the first time she'd been made to feel out of place in spaces she had a right to enter. It had happened in academic halls, boardrooms with her father, robotics camps, even TEDx events where she was a featured speaker. Always the same equation: black girl plus brilliance, suspicion. She looked down at her notebook again. There, tucked into the cover sleeve, was a small photograph. Her and her mother, taken 5 years ago, before the cancer. Her mom had written something on the back in lupin cursive. Where you sit doesn't define you. How you stay does. Ariel closed her eyes. Stay, then. Let the world adjust around you. Let them shift. A sharp ding echoed through the cabin. A new voice crackled through the intercom. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We've encountered a minor systems delay with our in-flight connectivity. Our team is troubleshooting, and will update shortly. Thank you for your patience. In first class, Victoria Granger was tapping furiously on her iPad. No signal, she muttered. I have meetings. She stood abruptly and began walking toward the galley. Ariel turned slightly, watching her go. A calm settled in her chest. Something was shifting, and she knew, without a doubt, it was just beginning. Langston Monroe sat in the rear row of business class, his fingers gently steepled beneath his chin. His posture, like his reputation, was composed. He hadn't moved a muscle when his daughter's voice first rose, not in defiance, but in quiet dignity. He knew this moment would come, not this exact moment, on this flight, between Geneva and Boston, but the moment when Ariel would no longer accept erasure with silence. She was no longer just the prodigious girl who built Orin in a high school science lab. She was a young woman now, and the world, as it often did, was about to learn just how unready it was for brilliance cloaked in black skin. Up front, the flight attendant Brianna Carver was speaking again, her voice clipped and falsely polite. Miss Monroe, please. I've spoken with the captain. We're asking for your cooperation for security purposes. Security purposes. The phrase echoed like a blade through the cabin. Ariel didn't raise her voice. She didn't flinch. Her eyes remained steady as they swept across the cabin. Do I look like a security threat? The silence that followed her question was thick. No one dared answer. Not the woman who had taken her seat, not the crew, not the businessman clutching his leather briefcase like a shield. She looked at Brianna again. Tell me, Do I look like a danger to anyone on this plane? Langston closed his eyes briefly. He felt something tighten in his chest, not from fear, but from memory. He remembered asking that same question in a boardroom 25 years ago, when an executive had him removed from a meeting in a building he owned. It never really changes, he thought, just the backdrop. Up front, Ariel continued, her voice steady. I'm 16. I've won 3 National AI Innovation Awards. I built a communication tool for nonverbal children that's being piloted in 6 countries. And I was invited to Geneva to speak, not attend, speak at the World Robotics Youth Congress. She paused. And you still think I'm in the wrong seat? A murmur stirred across the cabin. It was soft at first. Then someone clapped, just once, then again. Soon, a few more joined in hesitant applause, the kind that comes from guilt or awakening. Brianna looked flustered. She took a step back, trying to regain composure. I'm just following orders. Whose orders? Ariel asked. Victoria Granger's. That name hung in the air like a stone. Langston finally stood. The shift was subtle, but commanding. One man rising in a sea of seated strangers, his tailored charcoal jacket brushed softly against his crisp shirt. He walked forward, every step deliberate, his gaze fixed on the crew. The co-pilot had now emerged from the cockpit, sensing the growing tension. He was young, pale, and visibly nervous. Sir, please return to your seat, he said quickly. Langston ignored him. He stood beside Ariel now, his presence calm, unshaken. He placed a hand on her shoulder, not possessive, but protective. She's not moving, and you owe her an apology. The co-pilot's brows lifted. Sir, who are you? Langston reached slowly into his jacket and withdrew a small black leather folder. He handed it to the co-pilot without a word. The man opened it, blinked, and blanched. Brianna leaned in and read over his shoulder, her face drained of color. It's a federal override credential, emergency compliance level, real, binding, and tied to a single name, Langston Monroe. The co-pilot stepped back. Sir, I didn't know you were on board. That's the problem, Langston said softly. You didn't care who she was. You didn't think she belonged. He looked at Brianna now. You let that woman, Granger, take a seat that didn't belong to her. You chose to believe her word over my daughter's boarding pass, over her presence, over her record. You called her a security threat. He let the silence land like a verdict, and you never thought someone might be watching. Brianna swallowed hard. Mr. Monroe, I'm sorry, I truly didn't. Langston raised a hand. No theatrics, no raised voice, just a quiet stop. This isn't about me. It's about her. He turned to Ariel. You don't need me to fight this for you. You already did, but you should know I'm not just your father. I'm the man who owns this airline. The gasp that rippled across the cabin wasn't loud, but it was total. Ariel's eyes widened slightly, not in surprise she had always known, but in the weight of what it meant to claim that truth aloud. You're what Brianna stepped back, her hands now trembling. He's the reason this plane exists. Victoria, Langston said calmly, not you, not your miles, not your legacy upgrades. Victoria looked like she'd been slapped. She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Langston addressed the crew. This flight is grounded. All remaining passengers will deplane. A full compliance review will begin immediately. Flight 722 is now under audit. You can't do that, someone muttered near the back. Langston turned. "Try me." The cabin descended into chaos. Not loud, but shifting. Quiet movements, voices on radios, a call to headquarters, a call to legal, a call to someone, somewhere, who could explain how the quiet black man in business class had just shut down a flight mid-air. Langston looked back at Ariel. "Let's go home," he said quietly. "No," she whispered. "We go to Geneva." Langston smiled. "That's my girl." They turned, hand in hand, and walked toward the front, past stunned passengers, past crew who had traded empathy for policy, past the open cockpit where a confused pilot stood holding the radio in silence. As they stepped off the aircraft, Langston turned once more. He looked at the flight number displayed above the door. Then he looked down at Ariel. "You didn't just stand up for yourself today," he said softly. "You reminded them who the sky belongs to." And together, they walked forward not into silence, but into history. The silence in the cabin wasn't ordinary. It pulsed, hung, settled over the aisle like fog in a valley. Ariel didn't sit back down. She stood steady, the ends of her braids gently brushing her back as the plane's gentle motion lulled beneath her feet. She wasn't speaking yet, but her presence was already a voice. People didn't know how to look at her. Some stared, waiting for a breakdown. Others avoided her eyes altogether, pretending to adjust headrests or check their seat belts. Only Victoria Granger smirked, now reclining in the seat that used to belong to Ariel. Brianna Carver, the lead flight attendant, still stood with a thin veil of professional poise, but her hand trembled just slightly, clenching the passenger manifest. Her eyes flicked toward the cockpit. Captain Neil Prescott hadn't emerged. Yet, Langston Monroe was still in seat 4C, hands crossed, eyes closed, the way a man waits before thunder strikes, and then, finally, Ariel breathed in. It was a slow breath, drawn not just from her lungs, but from every year of restraint. Every moment she'd learned to sit quietly while her name was shortened, her worth questioned, her presence doubted. She exhaled. "May I speak?" she asked softly. It wasn't a demand, not even a challenge, just clarity. No one answered. So she continued. "My name is Arielle Monroe. I'm 16 years old. I have a boarding pass issued by this airline, seat 1A, clearly marked. I sat in my assigned seat without disturbing anyone." Her voice didn't rise, but it filled the space. "I was removed from that seat because Ms. Granger felt uncomfortable, and because someone," her eyes flicked gently toward Brianna, "chose to believe her discomfort was more credible than my documentation." Victoria gave a quiet scoff. "This isn't about race, dear. It's about entitlement." Ariel turned her head just slightly. "I agree," she said. "It is about entitlement." She let it sit there. "I've been told to be patient, that the world is complicated, that not everyone will treat you right, and you just have to rise above it. But sometimes rising means standing, not screaming, just standing, quietly. So that silence doesn't keep making room for things we should have uninvited a long time ago." Someone in row 2 whispered, "Amen." Brianna straightened. "Miss Monroe, we're trying to resolve this professionally." "You already did," Ariel said, her voice calm but unflinching. "You resolved it by choosing whose comfort mattered. You resolved it by asking me to move instead of asking for the truth. You resolved it when you decided I didn't belong." Captain Prescott's door clicked open. The cockpit light spilled onto the aisle like a spotlight. He stepped out tall, graying, authoritative, the kind of man people trusted without question. He looked at Arielle, then at Victoria. "I understand there's a situation," he said, voice low. Brianna rushed to explain. "Captain, we had a discrepancy seat, 1A was disputed, and for the sake of departure, she was removed because she's black. Someone called from the rear." A hush. It was George Whitlow, the older white gentleman from 2D. He stood now, firm, holding something in his hand. Arielle's notebook, the one she'd left behind. "I found this in the seat pocket," he said, addressing the cabin. "Didn't know whose it was. Started reading. Thought maybe it was a novel at first." He looked at Arielle. "But it's her work. Algorithms, deep logic designs. This girl's mind is extraordinary." George faced the captain. "She belongs in any seat she chooses. The question is, do we?" Captain Prescott blinked. Victoria laughed again. "Awkward, brittle. This is getting ridiculous. Now we're taking political lectures from airplane passengers." Langston stood, and that's when everything shifted. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't announce who he was. He simply stepped forward, laid a hand gently on Arielle's shoulder, and looked the captain in the eye. "Sir," he said quietly, "I'd like to request that this flight be grounded until a full accountability report is conducted." Prescott frowned. On what grounds? Langston removed a single card from his wallet. It was jet black. No company name, no number, only the Federal Aviation seal, engraved in gold. Prescott froze. Brianna gasped. Micah Ward. The young aircraft technician seated in row 6 leaned forward, mouth parted slightly. He recognized that card. There were only 6 of them in circulation. Silent authority cards, issued only to top-level FAA advisors, federal protocol enforcers, or high-level government compliance officers. Langston Monroe wasn't just some businessman. He was one of the 6. Arielle looked up at him, her eyes wide but not in shock. In knowing, Captain Prescott cleared his throat. Understood. Langston turned back to the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen, there will be a short delay. You're welcome to disembark if needed. Those who remain will be cared for during the review." Victoria shot to her feet. "What, you can't be serious? You're letting her weaponize her family?" Langston looked at her. "No," he said. "I'm reminding you that dignity isn't negotiable. Not in this air, not on my flight, not ever again." He paused, then added, quietly, "You may keep the seat, but you'll never keep the silence." And with that, he and Arielle returned to the front. They didn't sit, they stood, together, and the cabin, at last, breathed. For a moment, it was just wind. Not the kind outside the plane, pressing against metal at 30,000 feet, but the kind that moves through people quiet, uncertain, invisible until it stirs something still. That's what the silence became after Langston Monroe's words. Not oppressive, not cold, just waiting. Captain Prescott returned to the cockpit. He didn't argue, he didn't protest. Whatever power Langston held, it was real, and it had changed the flight from just another journey into something far heavier. Brianna stood motionless, gripping her manifest like it might dissolve if she let go. Victoria Granger. She didn't sit down. She paced, back and forth in the galley like a lion in a too-small cage. A performance now. Hair disheveled, pearls crooked, her voice just loud enough for sympathy. "I've never been treated like this in my life. I paid full fare. I have a right to be respected, to be safe. Safe. That word rang out sharper than intended. Across the aisle, a black couple traveling for their anniversary, Mr. and Mrs. Thomas shared a look, not angry, just exhausted, as if they'd heard that word used as a weapon before, wrapped in false threat, dipped in fragility. Arielle saw it too. She turned to Langston, her voice low. "They'll say you pulled rank." "I didn't," he replied. "I know," she whispered, "but they'll say you did." Langston didn't answer right away. He studied her how she stood without hiding, even though her hands trembled just a little. Not from fear, from restraint. "You okay?" he asked finally. Arielle nodded, but her lips pressed thin. "I'm tired of pretending I don't see it. Tired of having to smile when I'm being erased." Langston rested a hand on her shoulder. "Then don't smile. Just stand." And she did. Passengers were beginning to speak up, one by one. A middle-aged Asian man near the back, Mr. Liang, raised his hand and softly said, "I've seen this before, in the office, the way we're told to let things go so others don't feel uncomfortable." A woman named Denise spoke next. "I teach kindergarten. My black students get labeled disruptive for asking the same questions as white kids. This isn't just about planes. Voices multiplied, not loud, but steady, and Victoria couldn't take it. You're all turning this into a racial circus. What about fairness? What about rules?" A soft, weary chuckle came from seat 3D. It was Eleanor Wells, a retired black librarian in her 70s. She stood slowly, cane in one hand, voice as elegant as old oak. "Ma'am," she said gently, "rules weren't written for people like me. They were written to keep people like me in line." Victoria rolled her eyes. "Oh, please." Eleanor raised one hand. "I grew up in Alabama," she said, "sat in the back of buses, ate from paper bags because restaurants wouldn't seat us. I'm not here to argue with you, child. I'm here to say that this girl, this beautiful, brilliant girl, is not alone." Eleanor turned to Ariel and gave the smallest nod. Ariel felt something rise in her throat. She'd held back tears all morning, held her jaw steady, held her breath through insult after insult. But Eleanor's words cracked something open, not pain, not even pride, just memory. Because for years, her dad had told her stories like this, of struggle, of quiet defiance, of standing, and now those stories had faces, real ones. Eleanor, Mr. Liang, the Thomases, even George Whitlow, still clutching her notebook like it was gold. Langston watched it all, arms crossed, calm but alert. He hadn't moved, hadn't raised his voice. His silence had become its own gravity. And then, finally, Captain Prescott returned to the aisle. He held a printed message in his hand. Tight-lipped, eyes cast downward, he faced Victoria first. "Ms. Granger," he said carefully, "we've received authorization to proceed, but not with the current seating arrangement. You're requested to move to seat 14A for the remainder of the flight." Victoria blinked. "Excuse me. This comes from the FAA's Senior Compliance Division," he added, glancing at Langston with tight acknowledgement. "I will not be if you decline." Prescott interrupted. "You'll be deplaned." Her mouth fell open. "This is discrimination, no." Prescott said, "This is accountability." For a long moment, Victoria didn't move. Then she gathered her Louis Vuitton tote, huffed down the aisle, and disappeared toward the back like a storm retreating into cloud. Langston finally sat. Next to Ariel, she looked out the window. The sun was brighter now, or maybe it just seemed that way. "Thank you," she whispered, but Langston didn't smile. "Don't thank me," he said quietly. "I didn't fix this. They just saw it because you stood." And that's when the overhead chime sounded. A new voice came on the PA, not Brianna's. A different attendant, a younger man named Eric, who hadn't spoken earlier. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice soft but audible. "On behalf of this flight crew, I want to offer an apology. Not the standard, scripted kind, but a real one. Today, we failed one of our passengers. We let bias, not policy, dictate our actions. We are accountable, and we are listening." There was a moment of stillness, then applause, not thunderous, just steady, gentle, like rain tapping rooftops after a long dry spell. Ariel lowered her head and cried, quietly, not from shame, but from release, from the kind of validation that comes too rarely and too late but still matters. Langston didn't say a word. He just handed her a handkerchief, the kind with his initials embroidered in one corner. Ariel took it, wiped her cheeks, and whispered, "This time, they saw me." Langston's voice was barely audible. "They always will now." And somewhere above the clouds, a father and daughter leaned back into their rightful seats, not because the world had changed, but because they had stood still long enough to make it begin. They didn't speak for a while. The hum of the engine filled the quiet like a steady heartbeat. Outside, the clouds drifted by like thoughts too heavy to hold, but too gentle to ignore. Ariel sat in her seat, her hand still clutching Langston's folded handkerchief. It was warm from her grip, crumpled and a little damp. But she didn't let go. Not yet. She had just been seen, truly seen in a way that felt both beautiful and terrifying. Because now, there were eyes on her. Not just the stares of curiosity or passive glances that whispered judgment, but eyes that expected something, that wanted her to speak, to lead, to rise, and that pressure. It was heavier than the insult. Langston sensed it. "Want to talk?" he asked softly. Ariel didn't answer, not with words. She just turned her head and looked at him, her eyes searching his like maybe they held a map. He didn't push. He simply said, "You don't have to be anyone today. Just breathe." She did, but it wasn't deep. It was short, unsure. "Why did you wait?" she finally asked. "You didn't say anything when she took my seat?" Langston nodded slowly. "Because I wanted to see what you would do." She blinked. That hurt more than she expected. "So I was a test," he said. "You were a mirror." She frowned. "That doesn't make sense." "It will," he said, then leaned back. "Sometimes the loudest power is silence, and sometimes it's the hardest one to hold." She turned toward the window. "Well, I didn't want silence. I wanted justice. You got both." That made her pause. The reflection in the glass showed her face differently now, less controlled, more real. And inside that face, 1,000 questions stirred. What if she hadn't said anything? What if Langston hadn't been there? What if everyone had stayed quiet? Would she still be in that seat? Or would she be 3 rows behind, pressed between strangers, trying to make herself smaller? It was then that the seatbelt light blinked off. Brianna walked down the aisle with a clipboard. Her smile was brittle, trying too hard to mend a fracture that couldn't be covered with good manners. "Miss Monroe," she said gently, "I wanted to apologize again, in person." Ariel nodded. Okay, Brianna hesitated. You don't have to forgive me. I don't, Ariel said quietly. Brianna blinked, stunned by the honesty. But, Ariel added, I appreciate the apology. Brianna lowered her gaze. If there's anything I can get you, I'd like a bottle of water. Please. Brianna's lips pressed together. Of course. As she turned, Ariel's voice followed, and Brianna. She stopped. I think you're better than this job let you be today. That hit deeper than a reprimand. Brianna's shoulders sank just a little. I hope you're right. She disappeared down the aisle. Langston let out a breath. You didn't have to be that gracious. I wasn't, Ariel said. I was just honest. He smiled faintly. You get that from your mother. She tilted her head. You never talk about her. Langston looked out his own window now. A softness passed over his face. She was fearless, he said, but not loud about it. She believed in holding space for people, even when they didn't know they needed it. Is that what you're doing with me, trying to... Ariel leaned back in her seat. What happened to her? Langston's eyes remained fixed on the clouds. She died giving birth to you. Silence returned, but it wasn't empty. It was full of things never said before. Ariel lowered her eyes. Did she ever get treated like I did? Langston turned to her now. Yes, he said. Worse, but she never let it define her. Ariel's throat tightened. I'm scared it's going to define me. He nodded, then redefine it. How? By living fully, without apology. They sat like that for a moment, the weight of memory between them, shaped like a woman neither of them knew but both carried. That's when a man across the aisle spoke up. Excuse me, he said. His voice was warm. Midwest, maybe, with that calm rhythm of someone who listens more than he speaks. He leaned forward slightly. I just wanted to say, I watched everything back there, and I think you handled it with more grace than most adults I know. Ariel offered a polite nod. Thank you. He extended his hand. Name's Kevin. I work in publishing, and I don't mean to be forward, but if you ever write anything, I'd be honored to read it. Ariel hesitated. I don't really write for anyone. Kevin smiled. Then write for yourself first. The rest of us will catch up. Langston took his card. Kevin leaned back, not asking for more. It was enough. Later, the plane leveled. The drink cart rolled past. Someone laughed near the back. Life began to return to normal, but not for everyone. Ariel leaned her head against the window, her voice quiet. Dad. Yeah, I don't think I want to be quiet anymore. Langston looked over. You don't have to be, he said. You just have to know when your silence is power and when it's permission. She nodded slowly. The tears didn't return, but the resolve did, and this time it wasn't wrapped in fear. It was wrapped in knowing that the world might try again tomorrow, might test her calm, might shrink her space, but she would not move without choosing to. Not again. The captain's voice had been quiet, almost too quiet. We are not going anywhere until this is resolved. That line hung in the air like suspended judgment. Inside the cabin, no one moved. Victoria Granger sat stiffly in Ariel's rightful seat, clutching her designer purse as if it were a shield. The seatbelt across her lap looked more like a thrown sash than a safety device. Her face twitched with indignation, but there was a growing unease in her eyes. She could sense something slipping, a tide she could no longer control. Ariel remained standing just 2 rows away. Back straight, arms by her sides. She wasn't angry, not in the way the world expected her to be. She wasn't loud, didn't scream. That, somehow, seemed to disorient people more than any outburst would have. She glanced at her notebook, now crumpled from the earlier commotion. She gently picked it up, smoothing the pages like she was restoring something sacred. Micah Ward, the young maintenance engineer who had recognized her earlier, stood awkwardly at the front of the plane. He hadn't spoken since identifying her. He was watching the captain now, waiting to see what he would do next. Captain Neil Prescott stood at the cockpit door. His arms were crossed, his face unreadable, but behind him, First Officer Evan Chambers paced nervously, glancing down at his tablet and then back up at the scene unraveling before him. "Captain," Victoria said, forcing composure, "this is an overreaction. I simply pointed out that the young lady was in the wrong seat. I was protecting the airline's integrity." Langston Monroe stirred. No one had noticed him until now. Dressed plainly, seated anonymously among business travelers. His phone still tucked in his jacket pocket, untouched since this began. His eyes were on his daughter. But now, he stood. There was a quiet gasp. Several passengers recognized him immediately. Some whispered. One man even turned pale. "Sir," said the captain with a slight stammer, I wasn't aware you were on this flight." Langston gave a half smile. It didn't reach his eyes. "I didn't expect to be either," he said softly, "but plans change." Victoria narrowed her eyes. She looked between Langston and Arielle, connecting the dots too late. "You two, you're related." Arielle didn't answer. Langston did. "This is my daughter, Arielle Monroe." The name, spoken aloud, dropped like a gavel. It wasn't just the surname. It was the weight of who he was. Langston Monroe wasn't just a tech mogul. He was a quiet architect behind some of the nation's most significant technological infrastructure. A black man who had built his empire brick by silent brick while the world tried to look past him. And here he was, on this plane, watching his daughter be erased. Victoria stood up suddenly. "I didn't know. I mean, if I had known," Arielle's voice interrupted her, low and unwavering. "If you had known who my father was, you wouldn't have done it." Victoria blinked. "And if he was no one," Arielle added, "if I was just some black teenager sitting in a seat you didn't think I deserved." No one answered. Brianna Carver, the lead flight attendant who had originally sided with Victoria, stepped forward now. Her face was pale. We thought there was a mix-up," she said quietly. "We verified the seat with her boarding pass." Langston raised an eyebrow. "Did you check Arielle's?" She looked down. "No." A silence, full of truths too old and too sharp to name. Captain Prescott cleared his throat. "Mr. Monroe, I hope you understand this wasn't protocol." Langston turned toward him. His voice was soft. "What is protocol when a child is humiliated for existing in a space she's earned?" There was no answer to that either. Arielle finally stepped forward. Her eyes found Victoria's again. "You didn't just take my seat," she said. "You tried to take my place, my voice. You assumed your comfort mattered more than my presence, and the system backed you. That's the story. Again and again." She turned to the passengers. "I wasn't going to speak, but then I realized silence helps no one but the comfortable. So here I am." Captain Prescott took a breath, then slowly walked toward Victoria. "Ma'am," he said, Please return to your assigned seat, or we'll have to escort you off the aircraft." Victoria hesitated, then huffed and walked down the aisle. As she passed Ariel, she whispered under her breath, "You people always play victim." Ariel didn't flinch. She simply watched her walk past and sit down. Langston spoke then, turning toward Captain Prescott. "I'll need a word with your corporate supervisor when we land." The captain nodded, swallowing hard, but it wasn't over. Evan Chambers, the first officer, stepped forward. "Captain, I think we need to inform the tower. If this becomes public, we need a statement ready." Langston looked at him, then at Micah, who was still standing with quiet resolve. "Actually," Langston said, "Micah is going to be leading the internal investigation." Micah blinked. "Sir, you're the only one who spoke the truth when it wasn't safe," Langston said, "and that means something to me." He turned back to Ariel. She still held her notebook. "I came on this flight," she said, "because I wanted to prove to myself that the world was better than the stories I keep reading." Langston placed a hand on her shoulder. "Sometimes it takes living the story to write the ending." Ariel exhaled. Her shoulders dropped just slightly, not in defeat, but in a release. Then she turned back toward her seat, the one that was hers from the beginning. She sat down. The hum of the engines resumed. The cabin settled, but nothing was the same. People had seen something now, a quiet war of dignity, and it had changed them. Not because Ariel had shouted, but because she hadn't needed to. She had simply stood and refused to vanish. The silence after takeoff was heavier than any turbulence. No one dared speak above a whisper, as if they were still trapped in the gravity of what had just unfolded. And in many ways, they were. Arielle Monroe sat by the window now, her seat finally hers again. But she wasn't looking out. Her gaze was fixed on her reflection in the plexiglass, watching the ghost of herself. Watching the girl who had stayed quiet too many times before and wondering why this time she hadn't. She clutched her notebook like it was air. The pages trembled slightly, but her fingers didn't. Not anymore. Across the aisle, her father Langston sat calm, unreadable. He wasn't the kind of man who showed his emotion. He let it ripple beneath the surface. But tonight, there was something different about the way he held his phone in his hand. He hadn't made a call. Not yet. And that silence felt intentional. From the galley, Brianna Carver emerged holding 2 bottles of water. Her steps were slow, careful. She stopped beside Ariel. The girl did not look up. I wanted to say I'm sorry," Brianna said. Ariel didn't answer right away. She didn't look angry. She looked tired. "You didn't say anything when it mattered," Ariel finally said, her voice soft. "That was the moment. And you chose silence." "I know," Brianna whispered, "but I'm saying something now." Ariel looked up, her eyes steady, then let it mean something. She said, "Don't say it just to feel better. Say it to change." The water bottle trembled in Brianna's hand. She nodded, blinked away tears, and walked away. 2 rows back, Victoria Granger sat with her arms crossed, face turned toward the window. But even with her back to them, her discomfort radiated through the cabin like static. She had tried to disappear. Now she could only hide. But the real shift was happening elsewhere. At the front of the cabin, Micah Ward was speaking with Captain Prescott and First Officer Chambers. It wasn't loud, but it was clear that Micah was no longer a background figure. He had been noticed, and in the world of quiet systemic change, being noticed was power. Langston stood and moved forward. He didn't interrupt. He stood silently until they turned toward him. "Mr. Monroe," the captain said. Langston's voice was low. "You asked if I would speak to corporate when we landed." Captain Prescott nodded. "Yes, sir." "Of course." Langston looked at Micah. "I've changed my mind. I'll speak to them before we land." Micah looked surprised. "We'll begin drafting a report immediately," Langston added, "and Micah will lead that effort. But he's ground crew," Evan Chambers said, a little too quickly. "He's leadership now," Langston replied, without flinching. "And I'd like you both to provide full written statements. You witnessed everything." Captain Prescott nodded, though his throat tightened visibly. "Yes, sir." Micah turned slightly toward Langston. "Thank you, sir. I don't know what to say." Langston placed a hand on his shoulder. "Say the truth. The rest will follow." Back in her seat, Ariel finally let herself breathe. The kind of breath that travels through your ribs and out your toes. The kind you only take when the fear starts to lift. And then, she felt something unexpected, a tear. She touched her cheek, surprised it was hers. It wasn't from sadness. It was from holding too much in for too long. She opened her notebook and began to write. Not a poem, not a calculation, just words, raw, unfiltered, and real. Dear Seat 3A, you were never just a chair. You were a test, a mirror, a question. Who belongs here? Who gets to be seen? And what happens when someone says no to invisibility this time? Someone stayed. This time, I stayed. She paused, then underlined the word stayed 3 times. Langston returned to his seat beside her, quietly reading over her shoulder. "You always had the words," he said. "Ariel didn't look up. I just never used them." He gave a slow nod. "Then the world better get ready." A flicker of a smile danced across her lips, but the calm didn't last long. There was movement near the back of the cabin. A flight attendant was hurriedly opening an overhead bin. Whispers followed. Then the sound of something tumbling. Ariel turned around. "Everything okay?" Langston asked the passing crew member. She hesitated. "A passenger is missing an insulin kit. There was a report that it was moved during the seat swap earlier." Ariel's breath caught. She stood. "It's mine." Everyone turned. "I always keep it in the seat pocket in front of me," she said. "I didn't check after I got my seat back." Langston stood beside her, concern sweeping across his face. "Do you have another?" Ariel shook her head. "It's the only one I packed in carry-on. My spare is in checked luggage." Brianna rushed forward. "I'll check the trash bins. Maybe it was thrown out accidentally during the cleanup." Ariel sat down quickly. Her hands were suddenly cold. Victoria Granger stood, her expression unreadable. "I didn't see anything," she said, but her voice betrayed her. Langston's eyes locked onto her. "Did you touch anything in the seat pocket? I thought it was trash," she said. "A plastic case. I didn't know." Ariel was pale now. Langston reached for the call button. The captain appeared seconds later. "We need medical protocol now," Langston said. "My daughter is a type 1 diabetic. Her insulin was in the seat that was wrongfully taken from her." The words struck harder than anything before. A child, denied her seat, her medicine discarded because of a lie. The passenger shifted. The anger was no longer quiet. A woman near row 5 muttered, This is criminal. A man at the front whispered to his wife. She could have died. Captain Prescott radioed the tower. Emergency kit in motion, he said. We may need to return to the gate if insulin is not located in 60 seconds. Brianna returned breathless. In her hand was the small blue case. She handed it to Ariel, who clutched it like salvation. She opened it, vials intact. Langston's shoulders dropped just slightly, but his eyes burned. You threw away my daughter's insulin, he said to Victoria. I didn't know, she said weakly. You didn't ask, Ariel said. Victoria sat down slowly. For the first time, she looked shaken. Captain Prescott turned to Langston. Would you like her removed from the flight? Sir Langston looked at Ariel. She answered before he could. No. Let her sit. Let her watch. And with that, Ariel turned toward the window. The world outside was dark, but something in her felt lighter, not because it was over, but because the truth had finally been seen. And there was no turning back now. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was loaded, heavy, like every breath inside that aircraft was tethered to something unsaid. Ariel sat quietly, insulin kit on her lap. Her fingers traced the ridges of the case, not because she was afraid it was gone again, but because the weight of almost was still clinging to her. Almost lost, almost denied, almost forgotten. Her hands stopped shaking, but her thoughts didn't. Across from her, Langston stared ahead with the kind of calm that made people nervous. His silence wasn't passive, it was tactical. Something was forming behind his eyes, a shape still unnamed. Micah Ward approached slowly, tablet in hand. His tone was low. Sir, the internal report draft is ready. Would you like to review it before we transmit to the corporate line? Langston didn't blink. Send it. Micah hesitated. Are you sure you don't want to add anything? Langston finally turned to him. Every detail you witnessed is already enough. We don't need to embellish the truth. The truth is brutal enough on its own. Micah nodded and walked back toward the crew station. His steps, though quiet, carried the weight of authority he hadn't known he possessed until tonight. Back near row 7, Victoria Granger sat frozen, arms wrapped around herself like a shield. The flight attendants had stopped trying to appease her. Even they could feel the shift now, the air no longer bent to her comfort. Ariel glanced at her notebook again, then closed it gently. She turned to her father. Are we really going to let this go unspoken? Just send a report and move on. Langston looked at her, then leaned in closer, his voice warm but firm. I'm not sending a report to move on. I'm sending it to open a door that only opens from the inside. Let them see what's been living behind it. Then we decide what happens next. Ariel watched him, then slowly nodded, and then something happened, a chime. The overhead speaker clicked. Captain Prescott's voice came through, less mechanical than before. Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. We're currently at cruising altitude. But I want to speak to you, not as your pilot, but as a person. The cabin quieted further, if that was even possible. An incident occurred earlier in this flight. Some of you witnessed it. Some may have heard whispers. A young passenger was denied her rightful seat. Her belongings were displaced. Her health was compromised, not due to turbulence or delays, but because of bias, because someone assumed she didn't belong. There were a few gasps. Victoria shrank into her seat. Captain Prescott continued. This is not protocol. This is not who we claim to be as a company. I want you to know, on behalf of the flight deck, that we saw it, and we're not pretending it didn't happen." Ariel's eyes widened. So did Langston's. This flight is not just traveling from one city to another. Tonight, we are crossing a different kind of boundary, one that asks us what we tolerate in silence, what we overlook when it's not us, and whether we are willing to be different moving forward. A pause. I apologize to Miss Arielle Monroe and her family, not just as a captain, but as a man, a father, a human being. Thank you for your grace. Silence. Then soft clapping began from the front row. A slow ripple moved through the cabin. Some clapped with shame on their faces, others with quiet awe. Micah stood, turned to the passengers, and spoke clearly. "There will be a zero-tolerance audit on every Sky Atlantic flight beginning next week. What happened here won't be buried, because someone refused to be silent." Ariel's face flushed, not from embarrassment, but from something far deeper, recognition. She didn't want to be a symbol. She didn't want applause, but the acknowledgement, it mattered. Langston reached into his briefcase and pulled out a slim black folder. He handed it to Brianna, who looked startled. "Inside is a checklist," he said. "It's a framework for equity training I developed years ago for internal review boards. I want your crew to be the first to pilot it in real time." Brianna opened it, hands trembling slightly. "We will, I promise." Victoria suddenly stood, knocking over her purse. All eyes turned. "I didn't know," she said aloud. "I didn't mean harm." Ariel stood too. "You didn't see me," she said, "and sometimes that's the harm." Victoria's lips parted, but no words came. She sat back down slowly, finally still. Langston took a breath, then turned to his daughter. "I need to tell you something," he said. Ariel looked up. "You weren't just in that seat because you deserved it," he said. "You were in that seat because the world needs to see you there. And when they try to take it from you, that's not a signal to shrink, it's a signal to expand." She swallowed hard, the words settling deep in her bones. Outside the window, stars flickered in the dark. The plane cut through the clouds, steady and sure, in that moment. Ariel thought of every time she'd questioned whether speaking up was worth it, whether staying silent kept things safer. It didn't. Safety was a myth built on quiet obedience. This was living. She reached for her tablet and opened a new document. Not a diary entry, not a rant, a mission. Title Protocol 3A. Subheading Dignity should never require proof of worth. As she typed, Micah returned, now joined by Captain Prescott himself. The captain extended his hand to Langston, then to Ariel. "We'd like to extend a formal invitation," he said. "Ariel, we'd be honored if you helped co-author the new passenger dignity charter being drafted this quarter." Ariel blinked. "Me, you," the captain said, "because you lived it, and that's more than enough qualification." Langston smiled at her, his pride quiet and full. Ariel stood, extended her hand, and shook the captain's, "I accept." As they sat back down, Langston leaned in once more. "What are you going to call the initiative?" he asked. Ariel thought for a moment, then smiled. "The window seat." Langston raised an eyebrow. "Because you like the view," Ariel turned back to the glass, watching the stars dance between patches of cloud. "No," she whispered, "because it reminds people we all have a right to be seen. The cabin lights dimmed as the flight attendant prepared for the evening service. In that soft glow, Arielle Monroe and her father Langston sat side by side in first class, tracing the curve of the wing through the window. The stars above were pinpoints of quiet promise. Below, the passengers stirred with new energy. Arielle tapped her pen against the leather armrest, her notebook open to the first page of the window seat charter. She had drafted bullet points earlier, but now she turned each idea into narrative flow principles that demanded attention and change. "Are you going to let me see?" Langston asked, his voice low and steady. Ariel shifted the pages toward him. He read slowly, absorbing each sentence. The document began. "All passengers deserve recognition of their presence, regardless of age, race, background, or privilege," and moved on into concrete protocols, clear guidelines for crew training, anonymous feedback loops, and quarterly public reports on inclusivity incidents. "This is good," Langston said, "but you need a story at the top. That's what makes people listen." Ariel nodded. "A story that connects everyone to why this matters." She paused, thinking, "What if I start with our flight, just the facts, no editorializing, then ask, if you saw one wrong, what else might you be missing?" Langston smiled. "That's perfect." She began to write. The tap of her pen was rhythmic, deliberate, a heartbeat of purpose. The world above the clouds is meant to remind us of our shared vulnerability. On Flight 722, a young girl in Seat 1A was asked to move simply because no one asked who she was until she stood. In that moment, the sky opened not just for her, but for every passenger who believed dignity could wait. This charter carries that breath into every cabin, every terminal, every flight. She looked up at her father. His eyes glistened with pride. "That's it," he said. "That's the bridge." Behind them, the flight attendant rolled a cart of blankets and water bottles, handing out comfort without question. A small gesture, but now laden with new meaning. Down the aisle, Victoria Granger sat still, her posture unchanged. But Ariel noticed something subtle, a flicker of curiosity in her eyes, as if the charter's mention had reached her heart. Change didn't have to be loud. It could be a single word that lodged in someone's chest. Ariel closed her notebook. "I'm exhausted," she admitted. Langston reached over and held her hand. "Me too, but not everyone will stop waking up tomorrow." She met his gaze and smiled softly. "Then let's give them something to wake up for." The lights brightened again as dinner service began. Garnet-colored wine, ivory linens, the hum of polite conversation. It felt like watching a living tapestry. Ariel and Langston ate in companionable silence, the charter resting on the tray table between them. An elderly woman in the row ahead turned around and offered a small plate of fruit. "For you," she said. "I hope you'll share that charter at the destination." Ariel accepted the plate, their fingers brushing. "Thank you," she replied. "I will." Langston watched her, realization dawning. "You're already doing it," he said. "By living it." They ate slowly, tasting each moment. The plane's gentle vibrations felt like a lullaby. The world outside a vast canvas waiting for new brush strokes of justice. Near the rear of the cabin, Micah Ward leaned in to speak with Evan Chambers. Micah's voice was calm, thoughtful. "Captain, we'll have a draft of the incident report by morning, complete with passenger statements. Are we clear on the chain of command for review?" Evan nodded. "Yes, we'll submit to corporate compliance, and they'll loop in the FAA. Should be standard procedure. Micah paused. Will they act? Evan sighed. Your family name carries weight, but real change, that's on us. Micah squared his shoulders. Then we won't let it slip away. Evan placed a hand on his shoulder. You're doing good work. Micah's eyes flicked to Ariel's seat. She wasn't just any passenger, was she? Evan shook his head. She was the wake-up call. The lights dimmed once more for a movie. Passengers watched silently, some nodding off. Arielle leaned her head against the window, drowsy but alert. Her notebook remained closed in her lap, its purpose fulfilled for now. Langston closed his eyes and exhaled. Dad Ariel whispered. He opened his eyes. Yes. When we land, will you be proud Langston studied her in the dim glow? I've always been proud, but tonight I'm in awe. She smiled. I couldn't have done this without you. He shook his head. You did this on your own. I just opened the door. Arielle thought of every time she felt invisible classrooms, boardrooms, even home when her talents felt too big for her age. She looked at her father. Thank you for giving me the space to open it. He kissed her forehead. Always. The film ended, and an attendant began preparing the cabin for landing. Soft lights came up. Straps clicked into place. Arielle closed her eyes for a moment, letting the journey settle into her bones. She felt different, now, hollowed out of fear and refilled with purpose. She looked at her father. Tell me again what happened when you chose not to stand the first time. Langston's brow furrowed. When I was young, I stayed silent because I thought my words might cost me more than they were worth. I learned that sometimes silence protects you, but too often it protects injustice. Arielle nodded. I used to think speaking up would break me, but tonight it set me free. He smiled. That's my girl. They sat together in that quiet moment, two Monroes connected by blood and purpose. Outside, the runway lights grew brighter. The hum of descent began, engines lowering, the world below prepared to accept them back. As the plane touched down and rolled toward the gate, Arielle and Langston packed away their things. The charter lay on the seat in front of her, ready to be printed, distributed, enacted. Passengers passed them in the aisle, many offering nods, smiles, even tears, a shared understanding that something had shifted, that the sky belonged to everyone, not just the comfortable. George Whitlow approached and extended his hand to Arielle. I'll be at the drafting session, he said. If you need a history brush. Arielle laughed. I might. Micah walked by and gave her a thumbs up. See you in the morning, he said. She nodded. See you. Brianna Carver found Langston at the front of the cabin. Thank you for believing in me, she whispered. Langston placed a gentle hand on her arm. Believe in yourself. They gathered their belongings and stepped off the plane together. The jet bridge felt like a gentle promise, leading them back into a world they had already changed. As Arielle took her father's arm, she looked back one final time. The window seat initiative was just beginning, but tonight had shown her that change didn't need to be loud. It only needed one person willing to stand, speak, and catch the world by surprise. The morning light in Geneva was soft, painting the runway in shades of rose and gold. The jet bridge matched the fresh dawn, a bridge between past turbulence and new beginnings. Arielle Monroe and her father Langston stepped off the aircraft together. not as silent observers of injustice, but as architects of change. They paused at the bottom of the stairs. Langston took a breath of crisp air, the promise of the city unfolding before him. Arielle squared her shoulders, feeling both the weight and the freedom of what they had set in motion. Behind them, passengers shuffled down, their eyes bright with something borrowed from the night's events: hope, purpose, a faith that silence needn't be consent. Ariel looked up at him. Today, the drafting session for the window seat charter begins. Langston gave a small smile. And tonight, a new runway for everyone who believes dignity should have no itinerary. They walked forward toward the terminal, their matching strides echoing each other. Through the glass walls of the airport, they could see uniformed facilitators setting up long tables, eager faces milling about with coffee and laptops in anticipation. Inside the arrivals hall, a banner stretched above the entrance: World Robotics Youth Congress 2025. Welcome, Arielle Monroe. Congratulatory applause and camera flashes followed her name as she entered. Reporters and delegates lined the corridor, pressing forward gently. Some with outstretched hands, others with notebooks open, ready for the first comment. Ariel paused and gave them a steady gaze. The crowd hushed. Her familiar calm washed over her. She lifted her chin and spoke, her voice carrying the conviction of her midnight stand. Thank you all for the welcome. I came here to share innovations in robotics and AI for social good. But last night taught me something equally important: that technology is only as meaningful as the humanity it serves. The window seat charter we're drafting will ensure that every person, on every flight, in every corridor, has the right to be seen and respected. Sustained applause followed. Cameras clicked. Phone recordings lit up like constellations in the dawn. Langston slipped his arm around her shoulders, proud yet humbled. Brianna Carver and Micah Ward approached from behind, their faces shining with purpose. Both carried tablets syncing drafts and transcripts of testimonies collected overnight. They would carry these to the drafting session as concrete evidence of change already underway. Victoria Granger lingered at the edge of the gathering, hesitant yet present. Arielle's gaze met hers for a heartbeat. No accusation passed between them, just the knowledge that some lessons carried weight beyond words. Victoria offered a small nod, an unspoken apology tucked behind her eyes. Arielle nodded back, granting a forgiveness she had earned and Victoria had not begged for. A gentle hand touched Langston's coat. Captain Neil Prescott, in uniform, with Evan Chambers by his side, bowed his head slightly. "Arielle," he said, "your courage inspired us all. A few days ago I was a pilot. Last night I became a steward of something greater. Thank you." Langston smiled. "We're all stewards of dignity now." The drafting room awaited them. Long tables, whiteboards, interactive screens, delegates from the airline, representatives from the FAA, robotics experts, legal counsel, even a few passengers who had spoken up in the cabin. They formed a circle, not of co-workers but of co-conspirators against indifference. Arielle and Langston settled into seats at the head of the table. Arielle's notebook lay open to the charter's first page. Langston connected his tablet for projection. The room fell silent in that collective hush that signals the beginning of real work. "Let's begin," Arielle said, her pen poised. Ideas flew: practical modules for crew training, pilot empathy workshops, passenger feedback systems without fear of reprisal, mandatory quarterly inclusivity audits, accessible reporting channels. Each suggestion was weighed against the core question Ariel had asked in the cabin. If you saw one wrong, what else might you be missing? Micah argued for blinded data collection, ensuring incidents were recorded without demographic prejudice. Brianna advocated for empathy narratives in training videos, real stories of passengers impacted by bias. Even Victoria, summoned by Langston, volunteered to fund a portion of the first pilot program after seeing what dismantling silence could achieve. Langston provided the financial backing, his voice calm, resolute. Hours passed, papers accumulated, laptops glowed, glasses refilled. The atmosphere buzzed with the same electric purpose Ariel felt when her AI won its first award. But this was different. It wasn't a prototype, it was humanity in motion. When the final draft was ready, Ariel stood, Langston dimmed the lights. Her words filled the room gently, rhythmically, like a heartbeat. This charter stands on a simple truth, that every person's presence is not an accident. Whether in a plane seat or a boardroom chair, each deserves the respect and recognition. No technology can replace human decency, and no policy can succeed without the hard work of listening, watching, and standing. As she spoke, the delegate sat transfixed. The chair of the FAA, under whose authority so much of air travel operated, folded her arms and nodded thoughtfully. An airline executive wiped tears away. A student from a rural school whispered to her neighbor, "This is what justice looks like." When she finished, the applause was neither overwhelming nor timid. It was thorough. It was real. It echoed across the large conference hall. Ariel closed her notebook. Langston rose and joined her. They faced the room together, a father and daughter who had rewritten the narrative of a flight and now of an industry. The delegates stood and applauded again, not just for the charter, but for the reality that justice could be drafted into policy. Later, as the meeting adjourned, Ariel and Langston stepped out into a courtyard filled with early morning mist and blooming jasmine. A gentle breeze danced through the space, carrying petals across the stone tiles. Ariel closed her eyes, breathing in the fragrance. "So, what now?" she asked quietly. Langston kissed her temple. "Now we let the charter fly. We watch, we listen, we stand ready, and maybe, one day, we won't need a charter because respect will be second nature." She opened her eyes and smiled, feeling both child and woman at once. "One can hope," she said. He gripped her hand, "and one must act." They walked to a small fountain at the center of the courtyard. Water trickled in gentle arcs, a living mirror of the sky Ariel so loved. She bent down and touched its surface. It rippled outward, a pattern that began in a single drop and spread until it reached every edge. She watched, thinking of the night before, of 35,000 feet of altitude and altitude of courage. She thought of the passengers who spoke up, the flight crew who learned, the corporate team who drafted, and the world that would read their charter. A single petal fell onto the water. It floated, then another, and another. Ariel stood and turned to her father. "Let's change some more seats," she said. He laughed, a low sound of pride and promise. "Let's..." And as the sun rose higher over Geneva, it illuminated two figures poised on the brink of every journey, yet to come ever mindful that dignity, like the sky above, belonged to all of them. As our flight lands, we carry more than suitcases. We carry a renewed belief in the power of one voice to shatter indifference. Arielle Monroe's quiet defiance reminds us that kindness demands action, and justice begins when we refuse to let bias go unchallenged. We watched privilege confront its own limits, saw silence break in favor of empathy, and witnessed ordinary passengers become extraordinary allies. Let this story stay with you that every small act of standing up for someone's right to belong creates ripples far beyond a single cabin. If Arielle's journey moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps amplify those voices still waiting to be seen. Stay tuned for more stories that celebrate resilience, call out injustice, and inspire us all to take our rightful seats in the world. We'll see you in the next video where another ordinary moment becomes a turning point for change.